So it's my great pleasure to have as our guest today, Brandon Kriner. Brandon and I go back quite a ways, quite a ways. So he was a much younger man.
Maybe we both were.
I think that's the way it works. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, we used to share an office, work for the same company and stuff. So welcome, Brandon. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, so much. Thanks for having me here, and looking forward to our conversation. You know, I was saying before the recording started, we never have a shortage of things to talk about. So
yeah, we could do an hour just on baseball, probably.
Yeah.
So I always like to start with the origin story. So I know a good bit of yours, but you've had some interesting, crossing over from service providers to asset holders and back again. Give us a little rundown, on how you got here today in asset management.
Well, quite by accident, and I'm sure, I know many practitioners of asset management love to say nobody ever set out to be an asset manager. I think when we find one of those people, that'll be a big deal. So my first job out of college was an IT help desk support representative, and I worked for a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers in the Washington, D.C. area. And my job was to help people with their computer problems, and that was okay. There was also a person whose job was to be the asset manager. And at the time, the company leased all of its laptops and desktop computers from a leasing company. And when the lease would expire, that person was responsible for getting them replaced, also responsible for getting them repaired by a vendor anytime anything went wrong. So the person whose role that was when I started resigned, and being young and maybe foolish and definitely eager, I said, "Oh, I'll volunteer to take that on as other duties as assigned." And before I knew it, I was managing the assets, the computers for 3 offices in the DC area, and it kind of went up from there. And then I had an opportunity to go work on Capitol Hill for a member of Congress. So between the time I started this previous job and Capitol Hill, I met a girl. She would become my wife, and at the time she worked on Capitol Hill and had a lot of connections. So I ended up taking a job with another member of Congress. And again, I was doing IT systems administration and office and asset management for the congressman's office in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, and the district office back here in California. So again, I was managing assets, and I remember there was a storage room at the very top of the Cannon House office building full of stuff. And it was my job to figure out all that stuff. From there, I had the opportunity through another connection of mine, a good friend from school, to come to a company called Sunflower Systems. And that's kind of where my current journey started. Sunflower Systems was a company with an asset management software solution and an asset register. I would hear a lot of maybe folks here say, a solution to manage government assets and all kinds of assets, but mostly for the federal government and federal support contractors. And that's when I ran into you, Jim. I think we first met each other at the NPMA, the National Property Management Association. And I remember the day I joined that, I was on a client site assignment, and that very afternoon, there was going to be a local chapter meeting of the NPMA, and my client, a gentleman named Bill Franklin from Notice, who's now the national president of NPMA, and one of my colleagues, a guy named Skip Adolph, said, "You should come to this meeting." And I went to this meeting, and it was all people gathered together to talk about asset management, and in that group, mostly, government defense contractors managing government assets. And I learned a lot. And then I had an opportunity to continue to get involved in that organization, the NPMA, both as a presenter and an author of white papers, and involved in the leadership. And I've been doing that for a number of years. So that was kind of my background in, I would say, sort of a wider aperture of asset management, beyond just computer stuff. And in the meantime, I also had a chance as a consultant there to work with all sorts of federal agencies and other organizations on their asset management problems. So both through implementing the Sunflower software solution that we provide, you go in there and the first thing you do is you gather the business requirements, right? What are your challenges? What is your mission, and how does asset management fit into that mission? And so that was a great experience to learn about how a number of different organizations face asset management challenges. Then I had a chance to become a practitioner of asset management myself. So I came out of the consulting side and I went to work for a company called, what's now called L3 Harris Technologies out in Melbourne, Florida. And technology company, government contractor, and was responsible for managing all of the assets on hundreds of government contracts that this company would use to make incredible products and services for the US federal government. And that was a great experience. Learned a lot, worked with a lot of different government agencies and people, and got a really firsthand, that was my first, sort of hands-on experience of how assets are actually being used, right? So there's a lot of asset management that is reporting and collecting data about assets. But it's another thing entirely to be in the labs with the test equipment or be on the manufacturing floor and see how these things are working, and hear from the engineers that are building this stuff. And you really get an appreciation for what we're doing and what it takes and how that's all connected. After that, I had a chance to work for another government contractor, Northrop Grumman Aerospace Systems out in Redondo Beach, California. Similar concept, but a lot bigger thing. So in terms of assets to be managed, I got to go see the James Webb Space Telescope when it was under construction in the high bay there. B-1 stealth bombers, the kinds of things you're seeing, the flight line for the F/A-18 aircraft. And it's just really cool. I've got all these cool stories of seeing cool things through asset management. I got to go up on the launch pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center while doing some consulting down in Florida for a company that was supporting the space shuttle. So I'm a big aviation and space geek and science geek, and just the ability to see the assets that are doing these things was fantastic. And then last but not least, I missed Sunflower Systems. I came back 2016, kept working with a lot of different clients. And then in 2019, we were acquired by CGI. CGI is a global information technology IP and services company, about 80,000 members worldwide. And here in the US federal sector where I sit, we have about 7,000 members. And we're serving the US federal government through asset management, financial management, and other products and solutions. So it's kind of nice to be back home a bit and also learning some new things.
One of the, I got to, I guess before Brandon worked there, I don't think after Brandon worked there, when we both worked for Sunflower, I got to visit what was then just Harris. And they had a whole, like they have a display room museum where you go into the place. And a huge amount of patents, all this cool stuff. But the coolest thing was they were the technology provider for instant replay for the NFL. that would get anybody's attention.
Yeah, that's right. And that was when you work for a large organization like that, you really get an appreciation for all of the ways that assets touch our lives. And then I had an opportunity to attend the IAM North America conference in Denver a couple of weeks back, and that just was a huge eye opener for me in terms of the wider world of assets that people are managing. And now everywhere I go, I'm like, oh, these are all assets, and somebody's managing these, and people depend on these for all the things that we do in our lives.
Yeah, it's funny. I found doing consulting myself still now that people say, well, our assets, and they expect everybody to know what they need, and there's like that can have so many different meanings and such a different scope. It's just remarkable.
Yeah, it means a lot of things to a lot of people, and sometimes that's a challenge, right? Because if it's everything, it's nothing is kind of my view. But I really like the ISO 55000 definition of, something that is uh, providing value to the organization, right? And we don't think about that often, right? We just sort of take for granted, oh yeah, there's this stuff, there's this building, and there's this sidewalk to get to it, and there's this parking lot, and those things all provide significant value.
That's nice. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the interesting parts of your career to me is that you've gone from, a software and service provider, to working, like as you talked about, directly with the assets. What are a couple things that you would say are that people, different perspectives of those two positions, of how people might see it differently and
Yeah,
understand it?
that's a great question. So everybody sees things through the lens of how they're measured, right? So tell me how you're going to measure me, and I'll tell you how I'm going to perform. So I've sort of started to think of asset management in terms of what I've kind of thought in my head as the holy trinity of asset management. So there's
Okay.
there's the financial side of it, there's the compliance side of it, and there's the operational side of it. So I've had a chance to be involved with organizations and even people within those organizations that are focused on those three areas. So the financial side of it is, what do we have? What is it worth? Because I need to report a property, plant, and equipment balance to my stakeholders. If I'm a federal agency, I need to report that to Congress and the American people. If I'm a publicly traded corporation, obviously I've got financial statements I have to provide. And if I'm a local or state government, I've still got financial results that I'm accountable to the citizens and the taxpayers. So, those people very much care about, okay, well, what are my capital assets and what's the net book value and how much depreciation, right? But then there's a lot of other stuff, non-capital assets that those people would probably say, I don't care. You go figure out what we're doing with, the other things that we need. But there's non-capital assets that are very important. So for a law enforcement agency, boxes of ammunition are not capitalized, but you better bet they need to know where those are, right? So just looking at it from the financial perspective is not enough. From the compliance side, a lot of the federal clients and federal support contractors I was working with or for, looking at assets more from a compliance standpoint. I have a contract or I'm subject to a regulation that says I will do these things with assets. And it really kind of has more to do with sort of physical custody of things, right? Where is it? Because it is an asset that is owned by the US government and therefore the American taxpayers. And therefore I have to be good stewards of that to make sure that it's used properly and not used, in a way that's detrimental to public safety or security or misused in some other way. So those people tend to be focused on those regulations and maybe less focused on the financial aspect of it or the operational aspect of it. So the operational aspect is where I had the least amount of experience so far, but it gets me most excited these days. And that is, how are we using these assets to accomplish the mission of our organization? And I think that applies wherever you are, right? Public sector, private sector, every organization has assets that they need to accomplish their mission. And that was one of the amazing things I was just sort of soaking in at the IM conference is I'm seeing cities and towns and public utilities talking about their assets. And, it's one thing to say, oh, we have a power plant, that's really cool. But hearing about things like the impact of climate change on that, well, if the river gets too low, the hydro plant stops working. If we don't figure out how to deploy our limited investments in our budget, how do we maintain the roads? And not only how do we maintain the roads in our city, but how do we do that in a way that provides the best return on investment and provides some of the best social justice outcomes. Like, are we de-emphasizing maintenance in historically underserved neighborhoods? So, I mean, this to me is exciting stuff. This is way more exciting to me than, where's this computer? And not that that's not important, but when we look at some of these big societal impact issues that tie back to asset management, that gets me really excited. And we almost have a moral imperative to manage assets, to provide quality of life for everyone, no matter who we are.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, having followed a similar path as you, from more personal property management to with much more understanding and involvement in facilities and infrastructure. It's really interesting. I was on a call with some people involved in infrastructure asset management, and I mentioned something about personal property management, and they were like, "What's personal property?" And they literally did not know what personal property was. So I always shall tell the story that organizations have more, invested in personal property than infrastructure, real property, and it has a shorter time for it turnaround from a life cycle perspective. So it's, the investment is huge, and the impact, as you were saying, I think is right up there as well.
Yeah.
So you've also worked for really small organizations and really big organizations. You got some quick thoughts on navigating that change? And
well, I'm so glad that I've had both of those experiences, because they are different. And so my experience of working with a small company, right? So Sunflower Systems, about 50 people, based on the East Coast in the Metro DC area, as well as the West Coast and the Bay Area. And when you're part of a small company like that, literally everyone takes out the trash. I remember driving to IKEA to get office furniture and then sitting on the floor of the office to put it together, right? And in a big company, it's like, oh, we have people for that, but we don't have people for that. So in addition to doing stuff like that, working for a small company, you get a chance to be involved in so many more aspects of the company's operations than you would in a large company where there's more scale and specialization. So I think what I took from that, and what I always treasure from that, is the entrepreneurial mindset that it creates, and the ability to think, I don't want to say outside the box, that's such a cliche, because people in large organizations think outside the box too, but think about, okay, how might we do this? If we could make this happen, how might we do it? Having that latitude. Now, that gets old real quick when you wish, man, we had more resources to do things. We wish we had more people. We wish we had more funding. We wish we had more talent or diversity or whatever it might be. So that's been the great thing about working for a larger organization, is you do have the ability to specialize and focus on things that are more interesting, because the division of labor for these other kinds of things is more spread out. So I'm really consider myself lucky to have had both of those experiences, and kind of carry them both with me throughout my career.
I kind of grew up in the retail business, and I always found in big organizations, sometimes people really didn't understand what the company was about. They knew about their job and what came in and what went out, but like, what business are we in? And people wouldn't know, really. They wouldn't know what we're doing. So that's my segue to tell us about CGI. I know you're going more from a software focus to consulting focus now, and how's that work, and how does CGI work that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked, because I love talking about CGI. You can see I have it up here in my background. This really is a place where people know what the company is about. And we have three main stakeholders that we talk about in CGI: our members, who are what we call the employees, our clients, and our shareholders. And everything we do is looking at how everything we do should support those three, right? And so in terms of consulting and software, so one of the things I really like about it is not only do we have consulting services, but we also have software that helps organizations integrate all these things. So again, the thing that gets me most excited is before we even start talking about technical aspects of software, what does it do? How do I click things? I really like getting in there and understanding what's important to you, the client, right? What are your business challenges? What are your pain points? What are your requirements? And then having the knowledge of asset management to then translate those requirements into, okay, so we have a software solution. How might that best meet these challenges, right? How might we configure this to meet those challenges? It's really nice. A lot of times I see organizations kind of do the opposite in consulting. It's, I have a hammer, so everything looks like a nail, right? And we try to take the opposite approach of what is the challenge, and then we'll go into our toolbox of solutions, of which, you know, our Sunflower Asset Management solution is just one, to bring the most benefit to our client.
That's good. So you got any, any project information you can share with us, the kind of things you're working on, or, any
Yeah.
stories to tell with it, give people
Yeah, a lot of good stories. So we have a wide variety of federal agencies using Sunflower to manage all kinds of interesting challenges. And in addition to the personal property, which is all of your equipment and your sort of stuff that people are using on a day-to-day basis, real property is of increasing interest to the federal government. And that's a lot of what we're seeing our clients come to us for help with. And so all of the buildings that the federal government both owns and leases, there are a lot of reporting and financial requirements across those. And when you look at and think about the number of facilities that the government owns and leases, not only here in the United States, but worldwide when it comes to embassies and other facilities, it's vast. It's in the tens of thousands. You think about every city has at least one Social Security office, right, in a strip mall, and that's a leased building. So governments are getting their hands around what is our real property portfolio, what leases do we have, what are the expiration terms, what are the terms of those, how can we optimize space utilization, especially now with more of a hybrid working environment. And the private sector is dealing with this too, right? We have all this commercial real estate. Are we utilizing it to the best of our ability? And if we're not, how does it make sense to consolidate? How do we accommodate a hybrid type of working environment? So that is becoming, I would say, where the real interesting stuff is in the federal space right now. And so we've been able to help several organizations get their arms around the real property portfolio and get their arms around the reporting requirements that they have to GSA. And there's some new requirements that are coming out. There's a new federal financial statement for leasing coming out this fall called SFAS 54. And we're currently enhancing our solution to be able to help organizations comply with that as well.
Yeah, neat. I think, a couple of years ago, we had on a panel, we had the person that was kind of, the designated person responsible for reducing the government, the federal holdings of real estate buildings. And we had like 250,000 buildings. And the year before, after a great effort, they'd been able to eliminate like 420 or something like that. It's like,
yeah,
250,000 is a big number of buildings.
Right. Yeah, and like when you first think about it, you're like, oh, it's a building. Like, of course it's there. Well, it's not about whether it's there. It's about is it utilized, and do we have good lease terms, and do we need this, or do we need another building in a newer area that previously didn't have a need for these services? So yeah, it's an incredible amount to get one's arms around.
All right, so we don't have too much time left, but how about a future question? Where do you see the future of asset management and what's going to be important? And then maybe, how do you fit into that?
Oh, wow. Well, I hope I'm still here to fit into it. I really think the future, I think I think asset management is going to really explode into the public consciousness in a way that it has not. And I think that's the case because of two things. Number one, the aging infrastructure issue in our country and likely around the world is well documented, right? So we're getting to the point where useful lives are coming up on water pipes and sewer pipes and bridges and dams and all of these things. You know, those things, 75 to 100-year useful life, and those things are coming up on needing to be replaced. You've seen major legislation come out in the last administration, in this current administration, and I think in the last administration as well, on infrastructure, right? Let's go out and fix these things. And when you just think about the scale of things, especially in a country the size of ours, there's a lot that's going on, and it's going to be a challenge for governments at all levels to figure out where do we prioritize these investments. And again, not just for the obvious things, but also where are areas that are underserved? Who needs more infrastructure? Who needs internet access? Who needs more roads? What made sense 100 years ago may not make sense now. So that's certainly very interesting. I think also the effects of climate change are going to be a big deal for asset management. You're going to have cities that have more flooding issues and have to protect assets or shore up assets for that. You're going to have, here in California, drought is a nonstop issue. How do we manage that? How do we manage our water, which is an asset? Coastal cities, right? We've seen the impacts of these storms. So I think, literally the conditions are going to change, and we're going to need asset management to meet those challenges. So another thing that just really struck me about the future was, again, having spent so much time in the world of personal property, the life cycle of the expected useful life of personal property, think about like a computer or something, right? Well, okay, maybe 5 years, even something that's longer lived, like a piece of equipment, maybe 20, 30 years. But I was fascinated at the conference, the IM conference, to hear asset managers talking about, we need to plan for 50 to 100 years from now. And to me, that was really fascinating, because the organizations I'm working with are so not used to thinking in that way. We're used to this fiscal year and this quarter and this administration and this, Congress and whatever, but here we're making decisions about what should we do to make sure that a century from now, this is still in a good place, or even better than it is today. And I think it's really impressive and hard to think in that way. And I think we all need to think in that way. And it's almost like, I'm kind of a sci-fi nerd, right? You hear about like there's generational starship concepts where, you launch a spaceship with a group of people and they continue to, reproduce, and eventually it's their great grandchildren that get to the, the distant galaxy, right? And so it takes not only the planning of people today, but also successive asset managers sort of carrying forward those plans, regularly reviewing them and updating them, so that when you get to 100 years from now, the plan is realized. So that's just a really, I don't know, I found that a really radical, for me, way of thinking. I bet a lot of people in this audience are like, get with the program, Brandon. But that was really interesting to me, because I live in a world of just, what's going on right now.
Nice. Well, that's great, Brandon. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thank you.
And we'll have to get together some other time, over a Zoom or something, and have a beer and talk baseball or football.
I would like that. Yeah, we need ALN happy hour.
We're gonna have a Christmas party, so
okay.
You have to wear an ugly sweater though.
I'll borrow one of yours.
Perfect. Okay, Nick, back to you, sir.
Wow. Brandon, thank you so much. A lot of what you said really resonated with me, especially bringing in social justice and just thinking longer term for future generations. And you kind of brought it full circle early on, talking about, you know, how we can get people in the future, you know, younger people to want to be asset managers, to be like, oh, that's what I want to be when I grow up, you know, that sort of thing. To bring it back to, you know, in this little sci-fi world we're in, how we can have that continuity of today's asset managers and the future asset managers seeing a singular vision. And with that, I just want to thank our patron sponsors again for supporting us and having awesome programs like this, as well as our other organizational members for making this possible. And Definitive Logic, I want to highlight for this week's sponsor. And with that, we'll say thanks for attending and participating, Brandon and everyone else, and we hope to see you next week. Jim, do we know who next week's is?
Might, but I don't.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm sure.
Stay tuned. We will you will
Yeah.
at least hear about it in the newsletter on Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, sorry. Have a great day. Thanks, Nick.
Bye for now.
Thanks, Brandon.